Hi, folks. Eric from Hit Subscribe here, and today I am doing another installment in the Freelancer Q&A series that I do. It has been a while. At the time of recording this, it is late February. We actually came to this place here in Arizona back in around Thanksgiving of last year, so November, for those of you not in the U.S. And I think this is only the second video I've recorded since then. It has been a whirlwind of work stuff and other things keeping me busy. Anyway, I'm not trying to make excuses, but I do intend to continue doing this series. I don't know if I'm going to do it exactly every week, but I definitely would like to keep it going. Now, the trouble with this is any momentum I had in terms of like questions in the backlog that were recent is just gone right out the window. So this has been a combination of me answering really old questions from my dead tech blogging and YouTubing days. Probably that stopped around 2021, and I still have questions that readers would write in with from all the way back then. And then things that come up either in our community here in Circle or the Hit Subscribe Slack or other places of that nature that people ask me, or sometimes I just see an interesting seeming question in a community. And I believe this is one where I just saw and came across the question being asked in the community. I don't think anyone was asking me this specifically. If it turns out you were asking me this specifically and I'm just misremembering that, apologies. But anyway, that's a lot of preamble here, but I kind of have to recontextualize. It's been so long. I'm going to try to get the muscle memory going here again. Anyway, the question here is, what should you say when a prospect tells you that money is tight? And if memory serves, the context of this was that it's occurring at some point, probably in the latter stages of the sales process, meaning I believe, if memory serves, the person who was asking this question had gotten on maybe a call or two with a prospect, and it was probably past the stage where there was some initial vetting and they were considering working together, and the prospect is essentially saying like, okay, give me some quotes or a rate or whatever the case may be, but keep in mind that money is tight. So what should you say in response to that? And let me bring my notes over here where they're a little more accessible. And I'll go into that in some detail. The first thing I'll say here is, if I were on a call, and I'm trying to think of in terms of, because I'm doing sales for Hit Subscribe these days, I don't think I've ever heard anyone say anything quite like that in a sales call with Hit Subscribe. It would be kind of weird for an established, mature company to say something like that. But I'm also trying to think of if I have ever heard anything like this back in my indie consulting days, management consulting, and I don't think so. I'm just trying to channel in this situation. What I do hear or have heard at times is something like, hey, and this is especially true if it's like founders that I know that are on their second startup or something, where they might say something like, well, we're really early stage. Can you give us like a early startup discount or something? That's a different question. And that's also something reasonable to ask, because a lot of vendors, from like Microsoft on down, will have programs that are designed to be more favorably priced for very early stage companies, with the idea being once that company succeeds, they'll do more and more business with you. So that's a different animal. I can't really think of a prospect ever saying to me like, gosh, money sure is tight. And I'm going to go out on a bit of a limb here and say I would consider that to be a yellow flag at a minimum, if not a red flag. And the reason I say this is, probably anyone who's watching this, you might be a freelance software developer or potentially a freelance content creator. You're probably doing something where you have a trade, and that trade is of some value. And for a client to engage you full-time for a year would probably be worth six figures. If that is true of you, we're not talking about some kind of commodity labor like you're in a small town and you're talking about like coming out and, fixing someone's furnace or something. And I don't mean to poo-poo that or anything, but we're talking about higher ticket knowledge worker services here. That's never really going to be cheap. And if you're in your town's like buy nothing Facebook group and somebody's like, hey, do you know who can fix my furnace and give me a cheap price or something, like, you would expect to hear that in a B2C context for commodity type labor. it feels weird for me to think of you hearing that as a professional in a professional context. It makes me, well, it sends my mind down a few paths. Number one is that might simply be a ham-fisted negotiation tactic where they're like, gosh, I don't really have a lot of money. Can you, I don't know, make your services cheaper? So that's one thing that could be going on. And I would consider that to be a yellow or red flag in and of itself. If you take it literally, however, is that business going to be in business very long? So they want to pay you to do something, but they potentially can't afford it. So that seems like a fairly questionable business decision. Why are you uh, going out and incurring a budget line item that you can't afford? Um, and it also kind of smacks of amateur hour. Like, who's the freelancer here? Like, I can't really afford to pay the tax guy, but I really need to, I don't know. It all just like, there's no way in my mind that if I heard that question, I would think anything good. The question would just be, how bad is this? Or how worried am I about this situation? The answer wouldn't be zero. It would be somewhere between, I can get over this, and maybe I could use the engagement, and then on the other end of the spectrum, where I would just hang up the call or something. I wouldn't actually hang up on somebody, but to say like, hey, gosh, maybe you ought to think about sticking with things that you can afford or something like that. Or if it were really a ham-fisted negotiation tactic, it seems like the kind of buyer that would be a real pain to deal with and would haggle with you about everything going on. Something I say frequently in these videos and on the channel and just in general is, if you're in the service business and you have a client come in and they're talking about how you're not affordable, you're too expensive, and especially if you're looking at them and saying, yeah, I really don't normally take on things at this low of a rate or this low of a price, but I guess I could make an exception here. What's going on is you're at the upper end or exceeding that client's budget, and they're at the lower end or below your minimum threshold. That is going to be a miserable engagement. They are going to want the moon because they view you as too expensive. So they want everything out there. They want you to do all the things. And you're not going to want to do much of anything for them because they're not really even worth your time. Just don't get involved in that. And so this thing, that they're saying to you, this, I don't know if I can, money is tight right now. I don't know if I can afford your services. That's screaming that they're going to be your least valuable client and you're going to be expensive for them, and therefore they want everything from you. So, even interpreted in the most generous way that they're not making bad business decisions or about to go bankrupt, even interpreting it generously, it doesn't presage a good engagement. So, let's assume for argument's sake that you got to pay your bills. Maybe business hasn't been going along particularly well, and you are inclined to proceed with caution in spite of this yellow flag. What should you do? How should you negotiate this? If this were me, the first thing I would want to do right there is clarify and say, okay, when you say that money is tight, what do you mean exactly? And that can mean different things. So one subtle distinction that you might not think of, but could be actually quite relevant. There can be a difference between the business having a cash flow issue and having a deeper, like business finance issue. So a cash flow issue, that might just mean that the client themselves, like let's use an oversimplified example, but maybe the client is in retail or merchandise and they make the lion's share of their revenue for the year from Thanksgiving all the way on through Christmas and the New Year. So they collect most of their revenues in the November and December timeframe. What that will mean if they're not really amortizing their operating cash well over the course of the year is that come October or so, they might like literally be out of cash in the bank. They might not have much money. Now that's a cash flow issue, but not really a business issue, because once the money starts flowing in November, they're flush again. They'll be able to pay you. It's just that right now they don't have the cash on hand. This can arise for any number of circumstances, but that might be one thing I would want to clarify. And I would just blurt it out if I was asked about this, is like, are you talking about a cash flow problem or are you talking about a business problem here. Because if it's a cash flow problem, that could provide you some way to be flexible with the client in terms of like a payment schedule. So, okay, maybe you're not flush right now. Will you be in a month or two? Because we could just engage then, or I could accept payment in arrears or whatever the case may be. That could be a negotiating point. And it's also something that does happen to businesses. That's a more understandable situation. If they're venture backed, maybe they've got funding coming in that they're anticipating, things like that. So cash flow is more of a detail of when money comes in and out. You still, it's not great if a business is telling you they have cash flow problems, but it's a much different ballgame from I just fundamentally can't afford this. So if it's a cash flow problem, you can talk about the payment schedule, when to do payment, et cetera, or maybe when to engage, should we talk again in a month or something like that. And that way, if they're blustering and doing a ham-fisted negotiation attempt, when you start to probe and say, so are you not solvent, or is it just that you don't have any cash right now? A lot of people will probably back away at that point because they haven't really thought through the fact that they're suggesting to you that they're bad at business. So they might say, oh, no, it's not that. It's blah, blah, blah. Like, they might back away from this as a negotiation tactic, or they might, be upfront about what's going on, which is, we collect money in these cycles. We have a particularly large client that is 2 months late in paying us, et cetera. So that could actually surface something a little bit more productive in terms of when to start or when to collect payment. So as you're clarifying, if they say, no, it's not a cash flow issue, it's something else. And the something else would be, money is tight, meaning like they have a pretty limited amount of money they can spend on this, or, at the most generous, it might be that they're trying to do something that they anticipate will help them with profitability, but they want to run a prototype first. So as a bootstrapper, I can kind of speak to this. Maybe I would have an idea for engaging a particular kind of marketing and prospecting campaign. But if the minimum spend for it were $100,000, I would probably back away and say, like, well, is there a reduced fraction of that we could spend to prove out the concept before I just tie up this amount of money in it? So it could be something like that. And if that's the case, you want to clarify that. Like, what do you mean money is tight? Is it that you only want to commit a certain amount of money to this until you see some results? Is it that it's just not that valuable to you? You want to go and you want to do some marketing, but you don't want to spend more than $200 a month. If that's the case, that suggests marketing isn't very important to that business. And that's a good thing to know if you're a marketing consultant or something. So you really do want to clarify what they mean about money being tight. And if it's something that commodifies things, you might just back away from it. So, for instance, if you're, say, selling freelance application development and you tell them that your rate is $150 an hour and they say, ooh, I don't know, money's tight. It might just be that they're looking to cap their budget at $75 an hour or something like that and try to bring you down under that. But if there's an actual like business case to be made for this, like keep in mind that money is tight because we don't want to spend a lot until we see some results or return. You can start to probe at that and say, well, okay, what do you mean? Could we structure this in stages? That can actually help you, especially if you're putting on your consultative hat, to think about how to price and scope the engagement. And that's really the importance of these clarifying questions is, okay, what do you mean money is tight? Is it that you just generally, this isn't very valuable to you? Or is it that you want to limit your spending until something happens? And if so, what is that something and what could we do in order to get there? And then what does it look like beyond that? So maybe we do a prototype engagement where I build out the whatever it is you want me to build, and we regroup in 2 months, see how that's gone, take inventory of it together. And if it's going well, then we do more work down the line. So clarifying this can really help you in terms of understanding maybe how to propose to this client. And if it's really just kind of a budget concern, maybe they're saying like, well, we only do want to spend $200 a month on marketing. Now you have some things to think about. Can you descope until you can offer them something for $200 a month? So like, well, okay, I'm not going to be your fractional CMO at $200 a month, but I can do X. So if you get a figure from them of what they're looking to or what they're willing to spend, you can think about descoping your offering or trimming things or doing something to bring it in line with that budget. Alternatively, if it really is something, if I were just consulting as a fractional CMO and somebody said, well, yeah, I don't want to spend any more than $200 a month, I might say something like, I don't know, get yourself a Lynda subscription or something and learn marketing yourself or whatever the case may be. I wouldn't want to be flippant about it, but I might say something like, at $200 a month, you're not going to get any kind of serious consulting engagement. You really ought to think about doing something fundamentally different than what you're trying to do here. Because I'm generally a big believer in the sales process being consultative. So first, I really want to understand what this business constraint is you have when it comes to money. And if it is a true constraint, if you really just can't afford to carve off very much money to spend on marketing or whatever the thing may be, then what do I think you ought to do for that amount of money? And it might not be hire me, and that's okay. So let me wrap this up by assuming you've sort of kicked the tires on this. So you've registered that this is a flag, at least a yellow flag, if not a red one. And then you've asked some probing and clarifying questions. What do you mean money is tight? Is this a cash flow problem or is it a budgetary problem? What's prompting this? Are you trying to de-risk or is this just not very valuable to you? You tease out and go through all of that. And you decide to engage in some capacity. Let's assume that it's the most rational one of those, which is money is tight because I don't want to spend a lot on this until I see some results. Fair enough. The thing that you have to do last at this point is to think about, based on what you've heard, do you actually want to do this? So number one, if it's a rational de-risking kind of thing, do you think the chances of success in the prototype that you define, do you think the chances of success are fairly high? Do you see this leading to more business, or is it going to be kind of a waste of your time and the client's money? Do you want to take on that? Do you want to gamble at all when maybe you could just go on to the next client who doesn't have these type of constraints and do a bigger engagement? And then, beyond that, if you get the sense that this idea that money is tight, either they back away and they say, no. I mean, there's just budget stuff. You get it. If you get the sense that they're using this as a haggling tactic, and there aren't actual money problems, like, do you want to engage with somebody like that? Or if it's kind of like, we want to de-risk, but also we like to haggle, like, do you want to engage with somebody like that? So you really have to kind of ask yourself, like, okay, I've gotten to the bottom. I understand why they're saying this. What does that tell me about this as a prospect? And do I want to proceed? And that's something you should really ask yourself. And then finally, if somebody has, dumped their bucket about some financial struggles that their business is having, do you think they have money? Like, are they going to be able to write you the check? If you're worried about that, I would recommend saying, I want a 50% deposit, or I just want the full amount up front. And if they balk at that, you could say, well, I mean, you just told me you don't have a lot of money. I don't really want to risk doing work for free here. I wouldn't put it that adversarially, but it should be understandable if they've intimated that payment is difficult. So you've got some soul searching to do, even if their responses are rational and they're about de-risking and it all makes sense. They've still tipped their hand that they're presenting some risk to you. I don't see any world where them asking the question, or them tipping their hand that money is tight. I don't see any world where that's any flag other than at least yellow. I just can't in my head envision that. That would make me worried if I heard that on a call. And then I would really want to be thinking about, should I do this? And if you're kind of new to the game of freelancing or being off on your own, it can be really tempting to say yes to everything. And frankly, to be perfectly honest, even after more than a decade of being on my own, you can ask people that work for me too. Like, I tend probably to say yes too often. I tend to want to help. I tend to think I can solve problems. So I'm not immune to this even after all these years. It can be a hard thing to do, but you have to remember suboptimal prospects, prospects that are at the lower end of your offering range and you're at the upper end of their budget. They're going to not only probably cause you some heartache and heartburn. Maybe you don't get paid. Even if it goes well, even if those catastrophes don't come to pass, they're probably going to disproportionately occupy your time and your headspace and your energy. And that energy could be spent going out and finding and qualifying and onboarding better prospects. So always bear in mind that there are going to be more prospects, there are going to be more opportunities. Try to remove yourself from the moment, even if maybe things are a little bit tight on your end, and take the longer view of this. And if you're not in a position to take the longer view, I mean, if it's kind of a temporary thing, the business has been bad or whatever, so be it or whatever. But like if this is a constant theme where things like this are coming up, then maybe you should think about some kind of pivot or, going and taking a job and building a war chest and then going off on your own again or something. Because life is, too short and your career is too short to be spent like having to take on engagements where the client tells you they don't have any money. Like that's just not, it's not a good position to be in. So I would definitely think about long and hard whether you want to engage with this particular prospect, and hopefully you're in a position where you can, make that determination and take a pass if it doesn't strike you as being worth doing. So yeah, hopefully that is somewhat helpful or informative for some of you watching, and I will catch you all next time.